Welcome to MC Talk, episode 2. Where are we going? Again with Bob Hoban and Philip Snow. So the conversation today is where are we going? And given Florida, Illinois, North Carolina, and the Miller Amendment, I think this is a great position to start with the Miller Amendment. So, Philip Snow, what do you know about the Miller Amendment, and what would you like to say?
Well, thank you, Brett, and thank you for having me again here today. And it's an honor to be in such esteemed company. So looking forward to what we have to offer this afternoon. And I think, what we saw recently when the 2024 Farm Bill went through markup in the Agricultural Committee in the House, Amendment 35 offered by Mary Miller out of the southern part of Illinois had a pretty devastating impact on the nation's hemp industry. And I think it had a pretty devastating impact for a number of different reasons. Chief among them was a significant alteration of the baseline definition of the word hemp in the context of the Farm Bill. Also some specific exclusions that were made as a result of this amendment. Those exclusions basically killed any form of synthetic cannabinoids. They also killed cannabinoids that were manufactured outside of the plant. And then they set a quantifiable limit on tetrahydrocannabinol that would be determined by the Secretary for the Department of Agriculture. And nobody knows what that limit is. So with all
and
of
you
those,
can't market them, correct? So you can't market THC beverages, for example.
right. So you wouldn't be able to market anything that has a similar effect to THC on animals or humans, most importantly. So nobody knows what that quantifiable limit will be, but that amendment from Mary Miller was rolled into a block of amendments other Republicans had offered to the 2024 Farm Bill, and they took a straight voice count vote on that and successfully passed through the Agricultural Committee within the House. So as it stands right now, that amendment is within the text of the 2024 Farm Bill, and it could, all but wipe out this burgeoning industry that we've seen emerge since 2018 that include, cannabinoids, extracts, derivatives, isomers, et cetera, and all the products that are manufactured with them. So the Miller Amendment is, truly a death blow to the industry as we know it.
Yeah, it's a good place to start because where do we go from here is predicated off that. We started with the Farm Bill. We know what the Farm Bill did. 2014 Farm Bill, 2018 Farm Bill removed restrictions. A lot of things have happened in between. But this amendment, as it renews this upcoming Farm Bill, it really does take away everything that's existing about the plant. Yes, there's some controversial things in the industry right now, but those controversial things need to be debated and discussed, and there needs to be policy around them, regulation. But you don't want to undo everything that's been done in the past.
You don't want to eradicate them, is what you're saying.
Exactly. And that's not what the politicians want either. So this appeared to be a sort of a buckshot approach to just, we're going to blow a giant hole through this door and we're going to see what the fallout is. And the fallout appears to be, in some ways, maybe it's brought a come together within the hemp sector of the industry, and people are trying to work together to preserve all uses of the plant. Because at the end of the day, that's really what you need. You need to produce, for farmers alone, you've got to produce and allow the entire plant to be used. The more acreage you can grow, the better American farming is, the more opportunities there are for farmers. So you want to make room for all of those uses. But how do you regulate them? That's ultimately what's happening at the state level. So,
well, and real quick about farmers, they changed it to total THC also. So not only is this affecting consumable products, it'd be affecting the ability to grow, products, given the USDA is now at 1% total THC. This would statutorily change it to 0.3% total THC, THCA plus Delta 9, right?
And I think what's interesting about that is, the genetic seed stock that has been built up over the last 6 years, these farming practices that the farmers have been relying on since 2018, even since 2014 to be more specific, you're moving the goalposts in the middle of the game for them. And essentially, wiping out everything that they've been able to develop over the last 6 years. And that's going to have a huge impact, from where this all starts. And that is with the farmers.
So you can't grow it and you can't sell it.
And I think that, if you look at the 2018 Farm Bill, it was meant to be, this shot in the arm to America's agricultural industry. And I think that it did that in large part. Certainly we saw a dip in some of the acreage of hemp that was being farmed across the United States, but that number has actually started picking back up again. And so this shot in the arm, or what was meant to be helpful to, the farmers across the country, the rug is being pulled out from under them by virtue of this amendment.
Right when it's stabilizing, we overgrew, overzealous. Now that has all been used up because of, USA hemp innovation, if you will, now you're going to just kill it.
Yeah, and it doesn't belong in the Farm Bill anyway. Even if there's going to be detailed regulations, you're going to start, cutting different uses of the plant downstream. It doesn't belong in the Farm Bill in the first place. The Farm Bill, as you allude to, is a agricultural policy document. It is intended to set policy for a period of time, for a 5-year plus period in these cases oftentimes, to say this is what we'd like to see the agricultural sector in America do. And when we're talking about industrial hemp, you're supposed to encourage industrial hemp farming, not restrict it from the very get-go.
Help agriculture, not hurt agriculture too. I mean, that's the whole
100%
basis of the, any farm bill. It's a $1.5 trillion spending package, I think. So, the U.S. government spends money in order to bolster our agricultural sector, right?
Well, I think what's interesting is, nobody has realized, what this end market or this consumer market has done truly for those agricultural practices. Because I think, the genetic seed stock, the biomass that these farmers create, yes, that is in part being used to create consumer goods, but it's actually propping up this true infrastructure that is very, very vital, and that industrial hemp can truly benefit the entire United States economy with. The fact that we have German automobile manufacturers that are using their plants within the United States that are building door panels from hemp or dashboards from hemp. Lockheed Martin is developing graphene and, jet fuel from hemp. We're seeing it used as a cover crop to remediate the soil underneath it. But a lot of these...
Good rotational crop. Perfect one, actually, really.
I think it is. And I think, we're seeing highways paved out of hempcrete, because it's pulling the toxins out of the soil underneath it. But the infrastructure to put those practices in place, it needs time to develop. 100%. And, that consumer market is propping that up as those continue to develop. So I think... realistically, what you might be after, in the form of regulatory capture, and I completely agree with Bob, this isn't the right place to regulate those consumer goods at all. I think that's, completely out of...
Set the policy, encourage farmers to produce industrial hemp, to plant the biomass, and then leave it up to the states to determine ultimately what uses they're going to allow beyond your basic industrial uses, whether that be door paneling or insulation or hemp plastics or anything along those lines. But you have to think of it as a commodity. A crop is supposed to be used as many ways as possible. We find ways to use every single crop that's out there in as many
Corn can be eaten and thrown in your car.
Exactly right. It's a great example. By the way, one time I asked Ag Commissioner from Texas, Sid Miller, about ethanol. He says, why would you waste good whiskey and put it in the gas tank of a car? He's a hemp grower, by the way.
We welcome him. Hopefully the Mary Miller Amendment doesn't go through then.
So at the end of the day, it doesn't look likely that the large hole it's driven through the industry is going to stick, but there's a lot of things to discuss at this point in time. So how does that landscape get shifted? There's policy debates in every single state. It feels like these days, although there's some really hot states we can certainly talk about. But if the Miller Amendment is where we start this in terms of where we go, does the Miller Amendment reflect the way policy's going, or is something else afoot?
Well, real quick, I mean, what is the feedback been with the Mary Miller Amendment? We've all gotten different feedback from different channels. From my channels is Congress is not happy with it, right? It's very overreaching. It's not the right spot for it. Neither is appropriations, which we can briefly talk about what that means. Procedurally, it just was an overreach. I think people are quite upset about it, beyond the hemp industry. We're talking about people that are not involved at all. They're just procedurally upset with the way that it has been done, whether they're in the House or the Senate.
Well, and I think that, by virtue of it being rolled into a block of other amendments, that certainly had support on the Republican side of the aisle, I believe that that block contained, I think it was 23 amendments that went into it, only one of which was, propped up by a Dem, and the Democratic amendment was for farmers to have access to cell phones. I think you don't have to be the sharpest politico to question the motives behind it, but I think that is also part of the frustration. A lot of people felt like this was put into that block because maybe it wouldn't have passed a straight up and down vote. So perhaps there were some political motivations behind rolling those together. But a lot of the feedback that I've heard is, fear to a certain extent. I think some people that aren't familiar with the political process and don't understand that, just because that happened in the, markup committee, that's not the end. Again, right. I think someone said it best when they said, this is round one of a 15-round knockout fight. But, to the people that are operating, vape stores or manufacturing facilities, things like that, they might not understand how the game is played.
Oh, I got told, I got phone calls, of course, for a long time. Did we lose? Are we all out of a job? Is it over?
Yeah.
So I mean,
exactly.
From the small business owners or big business owners for that fact, as we know politics fairly well in this group, it did seem like it was just a death blow to the entire industry, which is, a PR spin, really. That's all that is it's a lack of education. It's also, what did the news cycles say? And, in our world, a lot of the news cycles are marijuana news cycles. So, those were the headlines. Hemp industry's over.
I was just gonna say though, but it hit even harder because it was a large surprise. I mean,
right.
to the point, it was going in. There was support. This was not something that the industry did not lobby for and did not reach out to folks and educate for. And then all of a sudden, it happened the way it happened. To your point, in sort of almost by fiat, right? By rolling into that block.
I remember that minute.
Yeah.
I remember that minute very well.
But that was the punch in the gut. That was the moment you went, holy smokes, what's happening now? So I think that just magnified the impact of ultimately how everybody feels. But to your point, you've got lawful business operators that have been operating for many, many years in a variety of aspects of this industry. And all of a sudden, with one blow, you're going to knock it all out. I don't think that will ultimately sustain because of that. And again, we're seeing it sliced and diced already.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, that's important to note, right? I mean, is it just, are we down for the count, or, do we get back up and keep swinging, and I don't want to talk about Rocky Balboa here, but I think that, this is that moment when, we get back up. There's other ways to fight this. And I think one of the things that you mentioned, Bob, and, is something that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, is this lack of information or this misinformation that is promulgated, whether it be by media outlets, whether it be by, fear-mongers, whether it be by, the marijuana industry. I think that that's what so many people were unaware of, basically how real that is and how much they are exposed to it on a daily basis. And I think that lack of information or that misinformation, drives those news cycles, is a way for them to...
It's clicks.
It gets clicks, and it grabs headlines and it gets people's attention. And, it seemingly, makes it seem as if the federally legal commodity, hemp, is on its way out, and a Schedule I controlled substance, marijuana, is going to continue to rule the day. And I've heard that many, many times. It said, well, maybe I guess we're just going to have to deal with marijuana now. And I think that that's, again, people that are either misinformed or, not really understanding what's going on.
I said this earlier today, which is pretty crazy to say. It was more of a shock and awe statement, but I said to Philip, I'm glad it happened, because now people understand what the stakes are. The table stakes are out there. This is, an existential threat, that there is a special interest group called marijuana that is willing to eradicate the entire hemp industry for their gain. So it's been helpful to the job at hand, which is obviously defend hemp, right, and protect the original Farm Bill definition. And people have really stepped up in other states, Illinois, North Carolina, New Jersey, Texas, Florida. People actually want to kind of throw in their hand to help out, and it's very important to contact your reps or your senators or whoever they are, because they do want to hear from you. I explained this in Illinois too. Is like these people go, even the federal guys go door to door knocking during the election cycle, and we're in an election cycle. They want to hear from you. They want to make sure they can count your vote.
Well, and I think that's a good point, right? Because people don't know what they don't know. And I just remember hearkening back to a past life, when anybody with a voice speaking on behalf of marijuana would have been laughed out of the room. Bob, you remember those days.
I do. I was telling a story just last night about the day that Mitt Romney was running for president, and there was a presidential debate at the University of Denver campus, and somebody from the cannabis, the former Denver Post's cannabis publication, they went to ask Romney a question about marijuana policy, and he looked at him and didn't say this, but the response was effectively, "Come on, I'm running for president. Ask me something real." But to your point, you can't dodge these questions anymore.
Well, you can't dodge these questions anymore, and
because they're real policy issues. They're real things that need to be addressed.
They are, and I think that hemp is coming out of those shadows and is now emerging into the light of those conversations. So whether it be gaining support on the local level or the state level, and obviously most importantly on the federal level, hemp has a voice too. And I think, unfortunately, it might take, an existential threat or, a shock and awe campaign, something like that to really embolden people to start speaking cohesively, start using the same types of messaging and realize that, we're far louder when we talk together than, just, being, satellites of communication and not wanting or advocating for the same thing.
And remember, there's a lot of forces out there. There are prohibitionist forces out there beyond what you're talking about with the marijuana sector and what they're trying to do right now. It's ultimately, there's prohibition organizations out there, and the DEA as an agency would like to see things go back to the way it was. So my point is, all of these things are lumped together from a policymaker's mind because of a lack of education, because it's all so new. But here's a question I just would think about a lot. When people talk about federal policy and you talk about the Farm Bill, and we're talking about the products for consumption, that produce an intoxicating effect or otherwise, how do you respond to people that say, let's focus on real hemp, meaning like fiber and grain? Because they sometimes people feel it's a distraction at the federal level when you're talking about cannabinoids from it. But my response is always that farmers, you want to promote as many things that a farmer can do with a crop as possible to deliver the best return for that farmer. And it's the United States, for heaven's sakes. We do things with every single part of the plant. I mean, it goes back, it's sort of like the green buffalo. That's how I look at the cannabis plant. You use every part of it. So why would you favor one use and disallow another use when nothing is prohibited in the law and nothing adversely affects society? So that's the way I look at it. But I hear that clamor a lot at federal policy. There's a bunch of distractions around what hemp really can and should be because we're talking about these things. But this is part and parcel, and it's the economic driver of the hemp sector right now.
Well, I mean, what is hemp right now? Right now, 90% hemp is a consumable product. But as we talk about where are we going, what is hemp in the future and how do you get there? One, with dollars, capital. The only way to compete with a plastic or a concrete or wood or any of those things is going to be massive scale manufacturing facilities. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of square feet essentially of manufacturing capacity. And, the reason why, it's kind of like a novelty thing. Like, I'm not sure what car BMW uses the panel in, but I'm going to guess it's in less than 1% of the cars. Like, it's a cool headline, right? But the reality is it's probably really not used too much in their cars. Guess, and that's speculation. But at the end of the day, this isn't a mass-produced thing. We're not, it's plastic. This isn't hemp, right? Your bottle that you get in the gas station isn't hemp. So right now it's a consumable market, which needs to be protected because we do need to use all of a plant. And if there's no downside to that plant, and actually there's potential, functional relief from that plant, then why not let it go, right? Eventually marijuana is going to be descheduled. Eventually. I don't know if that's, it's not 1 year. We know that. I don't know if it's 5 or 10 years, right? And I don't know that industrial hemp is 5 or 10 years out. I can't guess that. I don't have a crystal ball. I know what we have today. What we have today is, state programs that allow medical marijuana, recreational marijuana. Can't transport over state lines. You're really not even supposed to be operating in it federally. And then you have federally legal hemp, which is anything under 0.3% delta 9 THC, which allows you to make, as many cannabinoids as possible that you can find in the plant as of right now. So where are we now? And I think that's important. And then where do we want to be? Do we want to be using the full utilization of this plant? Do we want to be converting CBD into delta 8 into CBN? Do we want to convert CBDV into THCV? Like, we want these options because we don't know enough. If you don't know enough, how can you make regulatory or policy decisions on something unless it is bad for people? We haven't been able to, if I've sold 70,000 kilos of delta 8 in the last 2 years, tell me how it's bad, right? Have I negatively impacted society whatsoever? No, I'd say, MC Nutraceuticals has done a very good job positively impacting society, so that people can, either get their functional relief from, somewhere ease of use, whether it's a website or a gas station or a C-store, instead of a drug dealer. So that's where we are today. And where we'd like to go is to use the whole plant and make hundreds of billions, if not $1 trillion sector out of the cannabis sativa L plant.
Well, I think it's interesting, you mentioned, where we are. And I think, commonly, I always hear people use the word cannabis, as it relates to marijuana. When people fail to realize that cannabis, squarely captures both marijuana and hemp, by virtue of that sole distinguishing metric of, delta 9 THC less than 0.3% by dry weight. And I think what people, their perception, certainly is, you're on the couch, you're eating a bag of Cheetos, you're not really helping society, if you're using cannabis, regardless of its form, and everybody thinks about marijuana. And I think, the policy or maybe even the perception needs to shift because, people being forced into, state-backed monopolies in the form of dispensaries or adult use facilities, it's kind of like shopping in a grocery store, but you're only being allowed to shop down one aisle. And that Delta 9 aisle, that state-backed monopoly aisle, is really the only option that people can think of when you look at the whole plant, or, the green buffalo, as Bob pointed out. You have access to every single aisle in the grocery store by virtue of the different things that we have found in the plant. And keep in mind, so many of those things that we have found are, maybe new or maybe novel, but the only reason that we've been able to do that is all the research that has happened into this plant that is in large part.
You can't bake a cake if you shop down one aisle.
Well, there's that to be said, but I think so much of this is, due to the fact that we can now do research on this plant because it's federally legal. No longer are people sitting on the sidelines of doing research into this plant because of its, status as a Schedule I controlled substance. Now you have people that are doing lots and lots of bright and innovative things with it and realizing, this might help, with anxiety, or this might help with back pain, or this might help, with nausea, or whatever the case may be. And I think that is just, we are barely on the tip of the iceberg for that.
So when you look at the marijuana sector versus the hemp sector and this sort of butting of heads, at least from a policy perspective, you've got hemp, to your point, which is descheduled, which is federally legal, which is the same exact plant. It just has different ratios of the cannabinoids. Why wouldn't you take that opportunity and run with it? Like, you have a plant that does the same thing as this plant. It's just this has more concentration in one particular cannabinoid, and it's tightly regulated. This plant you can sell everywhere. This plant you can only sell state by state. How dare you go back to, I sound like, who's that woman from the Netherlands or from Scandinavia, the young woman who says, "How dare you?" She's always talking about the climate.
The climate girl.
In any event,
Greta something, right?
But Greta Thunberg.
Yeah, something like that.
How dare you go against a plant that you're in the same exact industry
Bob,
of?
I can tell you why. It's because it's intoxicating, it's unregulated, and it's synthetic hemp. Of course. How would you not know that?
Well, I think it's funny because, intoxicating hemp, and I think I could probably, because it is the same plant, I could easily say, well, you're selling intoxicating medical marijuana, or you're selling intoxicating recreational marijuana. I mean, there's really no difference.
What does that even mean?
Well, it's a polarizing word. It grabs your attention, and this argument that, it's intoxicating. Well, I'm not going to necessarily buy into that, or this loophole argument, that people are going to throw around and say that, the Farm Bill created a loophole for these intoxicating products. Well, I think that's an insult to Congress as it existed in 2018 because, by virtue of bicameralism and presentment, we had to go through the House, we had to go through the Senate, it had to get signed by the president. So are you saying...
And then it got clarified on March 29th, 2021 from a memo from Congress.
So are we saying that they intentionally were stupid and they did this and created this loophole, or are we insulting them by insinuating that that's what happened? And, as it relates to these, hemp-derived consumable products, I think, what we are starting to see, certainly in absence of federal guidance, and I'm not just speaking about to federal guidance as it relates to CBD, because we've been waiting on that for, a coon's age. But I think that, federal guidance as it relates to these consumable products, states are plugging those gaps, and I think we're starting to see, not necessarily, a war between marijuana and hemp, but there's certainly some state-by-state tension between these established, state-backed marijuana programs and this newly emerging industry. And I think we've seen, certainly some pretty big victories, as it relates to those, state-by-state, conflicts related to marijuana and hemp. And I know, one of them, Brett, you were pretty involved in, or certainly know a lot about, certainly the veto that just came out of Florida when DeSantis, vetoed Senate Bill 1698, which I know was largely propped up by marijuana interests. And, I'd be interested to get your take as to how you feel, that state battle was won and what it says about regulated hemp and regulated hemp products across the country.
Well, and just to set the table, so the Miller Amendment swings the pendulum far in one side.
Let's just say left or right. Let's say left.
And it says nothing with hemp anymore. Nothing.
Hemp's gone.
But again, we sort of talked about where that goes. And then
then
swing the pendulum back the other way.
2 weeks later, Republican DeSantis, the darling child of the GOP essentially at the moment besides Donald Trump, swings it the other way with the veto, for many reasons. But, I think the gist of it is Florida has a regulated hemp program in statute, not just, to touch on the, intoxicating unregulated hemp. Hemp is regulated. One, it's federally legal, so start there. But there's also, USDA programs set in place. So every state has, except for Idaho or Alaska, has sent in a 2018 Farm Bill USDA application or whatever it is. So there, let's just say 45 states have done that. So 45 states have regulated hemp, right, before statute. Then statute comes around to put in more guardrails. And Florida did that. You can't appeal to kids. You can't be under 21. So when, a special interest group, sues, goes to the Supreme Court and says, we need a constitutional amendment and we're going to put our name in here, and then we're also going to kill hemp while we do it in the legislature, a powerful governor is not going to let that happen. So DeSantis came out publicly a couple of days ago and said that. He said, I'm not going to allow one company to write themselves into law and then ban a legal hemp industry that is regulated. And he said, is it perfect? No, we're going to go perfect it next year, and I'm going to be involved in it. And I care about the businesses, the families, the consumers that use this regulated cannabinoid hemp program to live the American dream. The small businesses that prop up the Florida economy, which is a huge deal for Floridians. I'm not going to let someone come in from outside the state and kill Floridian jobs and remove functional relief from those people. So, that's the big thing in Florida. And, we're starting to see that a lot across the nation, even in, non-red states where hemp has kind of had a stranglehold. Illinois, the same thing was going to happen. Most cannabis or marijuana corporations are domiciled there, and they couldn't even get a ban through in their own state. So what does that say for where are we going? The Mary Miller amendments, sucked, but again, unified the industry to fight back. And I think, marijuana created woke up a sleeping giant that is a $30 billion industry, which is larger than the marijuana regulated industry. Don't forget there's an unregulated marijuana industry that's 3 times bigger than the regulated one. That's called the black market. So if we want to talk about unregulated, you could go down that rabbit hole. But, I think they've woken up a sleeping giant. And I think where we're going is regulated state hemp programs. The Farm Bill will say roughly the same. And, I'm glad that there's been acceptance to that. And I'm glad that the marijuana industry has woken us up because, it's good to see that people care about their businesses and their consumers.
Well, let's just dive into that just a little bit, that idea of regulation at the state level and regulations generally, because that's the narrative that's getting spun out there, right? It's, I work in the regulated cannabis market.
Right.
Tell me what that means today.
That means I'm not a drug dealer. I can't get arrested outside.
So, but my point is, right? It's somehow that if it's a state-run, closed-loop marijuana dispensary system, that's so-called regulated.
Right.
Whereas they're referring to hemp products as being unregulated. But to your point, and to your point earlier, that's not true. So what are those pillars? What are the common themes you're seeing amongst these states? And what states are poised to do it well right now? Because we see things moving pretty quickly in different states.
Absolutely.
But what are those pillars? I mean, forget about public policy for a second. Your company, this company, MC Nutraceuticals, what's important to you that goes into regulation standard across the board?
The purity of the cannabinoids, right? Pure cannabinoids, pure to go into finished goods. And, over the age of 21, I think once you get into the direct-to-consumer world, transparency and open market. Like, there's no reason. And if you would have had, and you guys can answer this question, in 2012, did you guys want, a cannabis industry that was going to die in 10 years, or did you want one that's going to be open, for affordable functional relief or recreational purposes? Like, what was the purpose in 2012? Because I think the hemp industry is exactly what was wanted in 2012. An open market where anyone could play. Like, wasn't that the premise of marijuana? Is like, hey, I want to smoke marijuana and leave me alone while I do it. Isn't that what hemp is now? So
2012 is a great point in time, because that's when in Colorado and Washington, of course, we passed the first adult use laws in November of 2012. Right. So at the time, it was...
And why are they called adult? Because I want you to leave me alone. I'll do what I want.
And I don't want to have to go to a doctor and get a prescription or a recommendation of some sort. I just want to be able to use it because I'm an American and I'm 21 or older, or whatever the age gating is, right? So to your point, that's where it was, right, at the time. It was right there. It was going from medical to, if we sell to more people, it's going to become more mainstream. And then guess what? I'm going to be allowed to sell it anywhere, which is what you can do with hemp now.
It's ridiculous because, you talk to some of the older people that, have been in the industry and respect what they've done and the legacy operators. But, this is what was always wanted. Federal descheduling of the cannabis sativa L plant. We're here. And now you want to put the cat back in the box? Like, how does that make any sense?
Well, I think it's interesting, what you just brought up, Bob. So 2012, campaign trail in Colorado, campaign trail in Washington, recreational marijuana. And again, you're removing this requirement to go to a doctor or get a physician's recommendation for a qualifying condition, to put yourself on some sort of a state registry list. And then, all you had to do was be over the age of 21. You would go into a dispensary, you would select whatever it was that you wanted, that was going to give you the effect that you hopefully wanted. And that was it, right? So it was pretty free access.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is if you look at some of those early adopters of recreational or adult use marijuana programs, there was always licensing fees, without a doubt. There had to be revenue in order to enforce the regulations that were put into place, but those licensing fees were not insurmountable. And then as the industry continued to grow, as more and more states decided to either regulate medical marijuana or adult use marijuana, you started seeing restricted licensure, which often came, vis-a-vis a competitive or merit-based application process that had substantial licensing fees. I mean, licensing fees that were in some instances $250,000 or $500,000 that were non-refundable. And even application fees that were the same, that were non-refundable. And so then, these different programs that came online that had all of these requirements or all of these hoops you had to jump through, it was one burden after the next. And then oftentimes, those burdens were insurmountable by the small businessman. You had to be, whether it's politically or economically connected within those states in order to get those licenses. And so all of these markets that have come online, the people that are, holding those licenses in, these medical or, adult use states right now, usually are there because of their connections, usually are there because of the capital. And compare that to the people that operate within the hemp space right now. I mean, these are small businesses.
Yeah, foster small business.
Let me paint a picture in an economic sense. You have in a new industry, emerging market, you have first adopters, right? So that's the 2012 folk to the 2016 folk, roughly. That's when, Canopy got a 15x revenue multiplier, which is crazy, right? And then what happens is stagnation and consolidation. So, the small guys get pushed out, the big guys buy the small guys, and then eventually, because of innovation stops, because you don't have enough competition, the industry starts to decline. So, 2020, the marijuana industry started going down because of those restrictions, because of the lack of innovation, because you're not letting free American minds come in and play. And this happens in every industry ever for eternity until someone breaks the mold. The Elon Musk of the world, the electric car, whatever they are. And hemp was just that. It was that innovation that said, okay, let's grow again. Let's go from 20 billion to 60 billion.
And when did we sign up for the dispensary system being the only way to dispense cannabis? That was the original deal that
Just to get it going.
As an industry made to get it going,
yeah.
right? Tax us as much as you want, regulate us as much as you want.
We'll fix it later.
We'll fix it later.
Yeah.
So fix it. Fix it.
And what's happened is the opposite, unfortunately, for marijuana. Until, again, an innovation comes out. 2018 Farm Bill, people figure out Delta 8, and now you have open access cannabis sativa L. It's not Delta 9, in a vape form. You can do it in gummies, right, to a certain degree. But it's not what you originally thought it was, which nothing ever is. You can't just look. No one has a crystal ball. Get with the program, evolve and adapt, and this is life or die, and that's what we're seeing is some people in marijuana aren't evolving or adapting, and they're dying because they don't have the cash flow. They don't have enough money in the bank from that 2016 run or 2019. I think it was 2019, whatever it was, right? And, a new segment pops up like the beverage segment. A lot of the legacy cannabis guys or the guys that have been in it since the beginning are in beverage now, So what we're seeing is some of them finding like, okay, we might not be okay with Delta 8 vapes, but we'll take Delta 9 beverages, right? We'll be okay with that. And from an economic cycle, we're starting to see them do extremely well and starting to see institutional players come in and all those things. Are those products now intoxicating unregulated hemp? I mean, that's what it is, right? I mean,
Depends on who you ask.
So, it just seems once you start like laying out the table chips, you're like, this is ridiculous. I mean, because it is.
But isn't that, like we were talking about, tie 2012 together with present day? It's the adult use cannabis industry. It's what you just described.
Yeah.
It's beverages that are being sold at sporting events, more and more sporting events every day. Major professional sports leagues approving these in their guidelines. Major concert events serving cannabis beverages. So in effect, adult use has happened, just didn't happen from marijuana. So why do we limit it as that? that's going to survive. So why not simply put regulations? People are going to use vape pens. People are going to make vape pens. People are going to make gummies and use gummies. If you prohibit these with certain ingredients within those that come from the hemp derivative side of the plant, people are still going to use them. Wouldn't you rather have it regulated, to your point, and have appropriate business around it, not people making it in their garages and slinging it? Because, that's the other thing towards the regulation point. This is unregulated. We hear that all the time, that, the bad actors are making this in this garages. There's bad actors in every single industry. And yes, the bad actors are bad actors. That's why they're called bad actors, right? But that doesn't mean you eradicate or eliminate an industry. There's bad actors in every industry, including the marijuana
and the bad
sector.
actors are so limited. I have to deal with it a lot because I'm loud, right? But, it's very limited. These Doritos, that's just black market weed. Those products have been, I think I talk about this all the time. Those products have been around for a decade. It's nothing new. Sure, the black market guys have figured out a way to get them into a gas station somewhere, but that's really easy. All of the legislation that's coming out in hemp has trade dress, and they're already illegal anyway because they infringed on trademarks. We just need enforcement.
Well, it's interesting because, the regulatory capture as a model itself, right? You think about what do you want to do when you regulate something, and what are you trying to get rid of? Are you trying to get rid of bad actors? Are you trying to kill an industry entirely? The demand isn't going to go away. You can't just wave a magic wand. People have grown accustomed to these products. People have grown accustomed to the functional relief that they provide them. And if you were to, wave a magic wand and ban these products, all of a sudden people are going to stop wanting them. I mean, that's just far-fetched, and quite frankly, it's insane to even believe that. And so I think when you look at, states that have taken up the mantle, in absence of that federal, framework, you look at states like Kentucky and Tennessee, recently passed legislation in Georgia, Florida got a good start on it last year, and states like North Carolina that are, moving comprehensive regulatory frameworks, through their legislative bodies, where you are, creating testing standards, making sure that products aren't attractive to minors, whether that be through marketing or advertising restrictions, ensuring that there's transparency of what the product's contents are through labeling requirements. All of these different things are happening. And
real quick, to go back a decade, would you have thought that the red states would be leading the charge on cannabis reform? Because what you just said would have been the best case scenario for regulations, open market regulations, a decade ago. And they're all happening. Those are all red states.
Well, it's, I think red or blue or purple, there's this regulatory void. And I think, the idea of regulating something, heaven forbid, capturing the revenue, vis-a-vis a sin tax or other, capturing that revenue while ensuring that consumer safety is addressed while also recognizing the innovation and the market demand that this industry has created, that is the path forward.
Right.
That is the direction personally that I think we're heading in. And I think that, regardless of who you ask, there's, probably a number of people that I, speak to on a regular basis, some of which aren't not going to agree with me, but I think prohibition is a failed concept. And it doesn't have that intended,
I don't think you can dispute that. I mean, factually.
Well, until you say it's for hemp.
That's true. It's true. Evidence-based, though. You can't dispute that prohibition has failed each and every time.
Yep. Life will find a way.
So where we're going is, sensible cannabis regulations in states that just so happen to be red. And, what happens in the federal government will yet to be seen, but my guess is, it'll be kicked into 2025. And, more than likely it'll stay the same because I don't think Congress has ever eradicated a $50 billion industry. That seems a little extreme, but let's not put it past them for now. But in the short to medium term, what we're going to see is red states 21 plus, testing requirements, maybe 25, 50 milligrams for serving on edibles, which sounds crazy to people in the marijuana industry, but it's what people want. 3 ml vapes, maybe. Licensing requirements that are less than $5,000, and anyone can participate. Does that sound about right? Does that sound like a good deal?
It's a good deal, and that addresses all of the concerns. You're not going to get that from a prohibited industry, right? You're not going to get
Or
that
restricted.
That's an illicit industry, so to speak. But at the end of the day, that's where things are headed. And they have to head there. Remember this. Schedule 3. Schedule 3, in effect, if you want to be a compliant Schedule 3 operator, assuming marijuana does move towards Schedule 3, we know it's moving towards it, assuming it gets there. So then all of a sudden, you have to sell medicine and medicinal compounds if you want to be federally compliant. People will say, well, no, I don't even need to be compliant now. It's federally illegal now, and yet I can do it. But then you're selling yourself short, because once it's made a Schedule 3 substance, large-scale interest will enter the game. Those large-scale interests will ensure federal compliance. And let's not forget that the marijuana sector is divided into different sectors. You've got cultivation, you've got processing, manufacturing, and you've got retail. The retailers are the least likely to get a Schedule 3 license, but the other ones can, more likely than not, qualify as a Schedule 3 licensee or to participate in that food chain, so to speak. So if that's the level of regulation where this is going, medical grade,
It's more regulation.
it's more regulation than it is today.
And more
which is-
restrictive.
And more restrictive. And furthermore, it has to be sold as medicine or a medicinal compound. So then you're eliminating adult use if you want to be a federally compliant operator. So then again, what's adult use? Hemp derivatives. So because it's descheduled.
So what you're saying is essentially again, going left or right, marijuana is headed more restrictive, more prohibitive, more expensive, and hemp will continue to head towards
And more exclusive, by
and more
the way,
exclusive.
too.
Sure,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
And hemp will continue to head right. Ironically, you have the blue and red, and left and right. And hemp will continue to head right, which is towards innovation, open markets, and adult use program that looks more like an alcohol beverage or a tobacco product, or things I guess alike. They'll be sin taxed to a certain degree at a reasonable requirement, not 40%, more like 10 or less. And the hemp industry will continue to grow probably at a faster pace, would be my guess.
Yeah, and is there any doubt? I mean, really,
If it all happens like that, there would be no doubt. So that seems like the most logical path are those two.
So to sum up just some of the things we talked about, because I think we covered a lot of ground. Starting with the Miller Amendment and where that moves, and then what are some of the motivations behind that at the federal level. Then you've got ultimately the pendulum swinging far to the other side with DeSantis' veto, which vetoed regulation, which would have eradicated
Yep.
most, if not all, of
The
Florida's
regulated hemp industry in Florida.
regulated hemp industry. Then you've got movement afoot at the different states, and all of those pieces of legislation follow these pillars we're talking about. Child restrictions, safety and dosage requirements, labeling requirements, and consumer protection and transparency in the supply chain. So, what's the rub? What gives? If that's where the states are going, aren't the states the so-called experiment for democracy? Isn't what's supposed to happen in the United States happen in the states first? And how many states did you mention have passed some form of this regulation?
I think it's like 12 in statute. It's probably like 10 or so, I would imagine. And then 10 bad states, 10 good states, and then the rest are kind of up for grabs. So I mean, where we're going is there, and there's still going to be a fight, and we'll continue fighting, and that's where we're headed. So I'm being told we have to wrap up, so I guess we have to. So that would be episode 2 of Philip Snow and Bob Hoban. Any last remarks?
It's going to be a wild ride.
It is going to be a wild ride. I'm looking forward to it.
The only thing I would say is this is what happens when a movement becomes an industry, right? You had this movement around the cannabis plant. Marijuana and hemp, free the plant. The plant was freed. Now it's an industry, and we've got to adapt. So none of these challenges, none of these changes, none of this contention is bad. It's all good in the long run, but it's got to get shaken out in a way where everybody wins.
Yep. That works for me. All right. Thank you all. Thanks for listening. Episode 2.
Thanks for
Where are
having
we
me.
going?